Yes, isn't it good? Isn't it a great presentation already?
Wow.
Yeah, very good. So, so just a little bit of context. I'm going to start by explaining what Vue is, how to use it, because I'm not wanting to dive too deep into what tooling is or how to do integration with Vue if we don't have a good baseline understanding of what Vue is and why you might even want to use it in the beginning. So I think I've written this talk before, figured it might be a good place to start. This is an amazing first slide, and I'm proud of it. So this is an overview of the ecosystem surrounding Vue. Goals of the talk, I want to introduce some of the basic concepts with Vue, compare and contrast with other frameworks. So if you're familiar with React or Angular, I will still have something in this talk for you. If you're not familiar, that's totally fine. We're going to point towards some of the community projects around Vue, so not just what's official from the community or from the official team, but also what the community is doing with it. We're going to look at the future of what Vue has to offer, what the future of React, so on and so forth. And we're going to kind of represent how fast you can build really, really, really cool applications with Vue. The examples: contrived, code messy, opinion spicy. Let's go. So, first, I just want to point to this code because it does really reflect how little you need to get started with Vue. So this is 15 lines of code for a very, very, very basic hello world message. You don't need to run any npm commands. You don't need to run anything special. That's it. You put that in Notepad, you hit save, you open it in your browser, you're done. And that's really impressive if you've used something like Angular or React where you have to run 3 commands and then you have to go and type in an executable, download node. It's a mess, right? So this feature is called template interpolation, which is an amazing amount of garbo language that doesn't make any sense if you don't know the language already. So what template interpolation means is that you can take data from JavaScript and represent it in HTML. So here we have our data message property, and we have hello world. And then we have these 2 little braces that interpolates the word message, or the variable message, from data into it. So if we open that up in our browser, we'll see the words hello world. This doesn't seem that impressive because no hello world really ever is. But the cool part about this is if we have something that will update this property, which we will see later on, it will automatically update the message in the HTML. So you don't have to do any of this like render this on screen, update the render, anything like that. You update the data and Vue takes that data and automatically renders it on screen for you whenever your data changes. And that's kind of the primary, one of the biggest selling points with something like Vue, React, Angular, is this idea that you can have this live, living representation of your data on the browser, even when you don't expect things to update. You can have them update anyways. Similar syntax to Angular, very, very similar syntax to React. So yeah. We also have the ability to do conditional rendering. This is another really powerful thing in Vue. You have the ability to show or hide elements on screen or render multiple elements on screen based on what your data is. So in this case, we have vif, which is an attribute that is not part of HTML, but is part of Vue. So if you add vif and the name of a variable, if you update this to true or false, it will open or close in the HTML. So I can even take a look at it. We will see that nothing renders at first. If I go in here and I don't know how Firefox works that well, so I'm going to open up VS Code. And example 2, if I change this to visible true, I hit save, and then we reload the page. Now we'll see that it shows up. Again, not that fancy as is, but we'll see some further examples later on that are much nicer. You can see that in Angular, you do things very similarly, just instead of vif, you do ngif. React is a little bit different. It uses short circuit logic using the and to not hide or show items. We also have the ability to do input binding. So if I want to grab data from my DOM and put it into my JavaScript, we can do that. So we use something called vbind, which allows us to change the checked property of a checkbox in HTML based off of the isDone variable. So if we have true, if you render the page initially, it'll have a checkbox. If it's false and you render the page, it'll be no checkbox. That's awesome. I don't know why that's there, but it moves. That's neato. We also have the ability to, I think I know what was going on. So you notice how there's vbind : check? Well, there's a shorthand here. I love that it's in the middle of everything, but there's a shorthand that you can remove the vbind and just have the semicolon. I'm mentioning the shorthand here because we do have the shorthand that will show up later on just because it's a little bit prettier, a little bit nicer to read. So if you see a colon, know that you're binding your data, your HTML attribute data to something in your JavaScript. We also have the ability to do loops. So let's say that I wanted a list item for every single item in my talks list. So I have an array of talks here, which is an array of strings. And for each of those strings, I want a list item to render that string itself. So we have key to tell Vue which item something is. So when it needs to go back and update, it has a way of knowing how to do so. We have talk in talks, which is just saying assign a new variable talk inside of this line, and then we render that out. Very similar to ES6 in React or MG4 in Angular. We also have the ability to listen for events from the browser into our JavaScript. So let's say that we want to call the add1 function every time we click on a button. We just add in the methods property into the Vue object. And we have the ability to update our state to add one every time. So if we open this up, I keep pressing the wrong key because I'm used to being on a Mac, and being on a Mac doesn't help at all. What is this, method 4? No, method 5. Okay. So if I keep clicking, we can see that the state continually adds one, adds one, adds one. We also have the ability to do computed properties. So let's say that every time you update one set of data in your variables, you want some other action to take place. So in this case, let's say that every time I typed a message into an input field, I wanted to see what the reverse of that input field would be. So what I can do is I can have a message property, which will display it normally, and I can use my event listeners on changes to update that value in the Vue instance. And then I can also compute an upper message by having that message be uppercased every single time that base variable updates. So it's useful for data mutations and all sorts of other things.
What's the difference between methods and computed?
Methods are functions that you can call. Computed runs automatically. So anytime that I update anything that upper message depends on, this function will run and it will act like a property. So notice how I'm interpolating as a property and I don't have to call it as a function or anything like that. That's because every time that anything inside of like line 14 updates, it will update the upper message as if it were a variable. So instead of having to do like a listener on a variable, every time it changes, you have another state that you then update and all these other steps. You just have a computed and then you're done. So.
You just change message and then upper message will automatically get updated?
Exactly, right. So if I have an input field, a free-form input field, and I just type a bunch of stuff, it can all be made completely uppercase and make it sound like I'm screaming it. Pipes do something similar in Angular, and if you're familiar with React, use memo is probably the most similar to it. Both of them have kind of nuanced use cases where this is like a very easy introductory demo, but to showcase how it's like super, super useful, you'd have to build out a kind of sizable application. Now, similarly, let's say that instead of a property, I wanted a function to run anytime one of my data variables changed, right? So if you're familiar with like lambda calculus or kind of more advanced math, this is very similar to like a mathematical side effect. So when this confirm Boolean is triggered to be true or false, we run this function, we get the new value and the old value. If the new value is true, then we know what the old value is, so we don't really need this variable. I just left it in there to explain. So if the new value is true, we do a confirmation dialog that pops up and says, are you sure you want to do this? If you click no, then it will revert that change to be false again. And if you say yes, then it leaves it as true. So a pretty neato way to run this side effect logic whenever your data changes. I will give a huge asterisk to this code sample. Do not use this in production. Or at least you can use watch. Watch is perfectly fine to use in production. But this exact example where you're using it as a confirmation dialog, don't do that. The only reason why I say that is that usually what you'll end up doing is you'll have computed properties, you'll have effects that might call data. You might have all sorts of things linked into this one piece of data, and you want to stop that toggle before it even happens, which is why a watch that changes it after the fact isn't really useful. This is just like a really quick example of showcasing how to run a side effect. Okay, so up until this point, we've been using new Vue to render to an element, in this case, ID of app, every time, right? And this is perfectly fine for super small examples. And given that we only have one extra script tag at the top, it's a really nice, concise way to do prototyping. The problem is once you start scaling, this is not feasible by any means. If I have 5 buttons on screen, I don't want to have 5 different methods on screen. I want to be able to break up and organize that logic respectively. And the way that we do that in Vue is we have components and component instances. So much like you would have a class that defines a base set of methods and properties and anything else, you have a central component, and then you can have instances of those components that have their own methods, their own data sets, etc. So in this case, we still have new Vue, which is app, right? But we're also defining a component on line 6 called hello world. We're passing in a data, just like we were doing before, and a template. So now we can treat it just like it's any other HTML element with hello world. Small side note, this is also incorrect. You're not supposed to shorthand it like this. You're supposed to have an opening tag, then a closing tag. These are outdated slides, I apologize. Not too bad, but I just figured I'd mention it because it's one of those things where if you don't notice it, it can cause very minor bugs that take hours to debug, and you're like shaking your screen. Why aren't you running? I'm not speaking at all from experience, not at all. But what's nice here is that, like, let's say that I want to open up. I apologize, I keep clicking the wrong thing. The nice thing is that I can have one, right? But let's say that instead I wanted to have multiple hello world messages. Well, oh goodness. I can just copy and paste, and there we go. So this might seem really trivial with just some data that's rendering, but if you start adding computed properties, if you start adding methods, you can really start to build up a very scalable application that allows you to reuse a lot of this code in different places. And in fact, this is a good example of where you can have a parent which has a certain style background, and then you can put your components. So you can treat it just like any other element where you scale them, you put them in each other. That sounded bad, but you can mix and match, Lego style. There's also the ability to have properties. So let's say that you wanted to have a hello world that had the ability to pass in new data based on which instance you have, just like an input on a class or a constructor in a class. You have the ability to define the type of a property. So in this case, name. We have a default value here, which is Corbin. And then we can interpolate that into our message. So we have hello world, this is, which is the message. We're interpolating that. And then we're interpolating name from props. So in this case, we could do the default of hello world. So hello world, this is Corbin. And then we can bind, just like we were binding HTML attribute values, we can bind property values to say like hello world, this is Joe. So okay, apologize. So it's cool to be able to do a lot of this stuff. one of the key differences that people like to bring up, especially in arguments of React versus Angular, because both React and Angular are built on that core concept of having components, but they do things in a very different way. React doesn't provide you anything. Like, it provides that and there's nothing else. There's no way to bind to your URL. So if you want your URL to change and do some different behavior, they don't have anything for that. They don't have any form of UI library. They don't have any form of, they really don't have anything. And in fact, React itself doesn't even let you render to the browser. You have to install an official sibling package called React DOM to just render it on your browser. Right? So like, React has a super minimal API, meanwhile Angular is the exact opposite, right? Angular has the kitchen sink and your fridge and some groceries, and like, you can build a whole app without ever running npm install any other package. It's insane, right? So it's cool that Vue provides this way to build applications, but is it like React in that you don't have many other tools at your disposal? Sort of. And this is where kind of the beauty of Vue comes into play. By default, Vue itself doesn't have a whole lot to go off of. You can't change your URL with different things. You can't change your global data store. But there are official solutions to those. So there are packages built by the same exact team with the same release schedule, same all sorts of stuff that allow you to add more functionality, but they're not like Angular where you have to use them, and if you don't use them, you're a bad person. And, which is funny because I like Angular for that reason, but it is intimidating, and sometimes it's like, well, I want to use something else. So let's look at one of those examples of something that Vue provides that React might not, right, is Vue router. So if you run npmi vue-router, something along those lines, one of those package names, it will give you the ability so that when you change a URL, let's say that you go to mywebsite.com/foo, it will give you a website that says, I am on the foo route. And if you go to mywebsite.com/bar, it will say something else. So in this case, we have hello app, which will show on either of these routes. And then we have a /foo, a /bar, and what is called a router view. So these are links, and this allows you to drop in any component that matches that route. So it's like a regex matching. If you match one regex of the string that you type in your URL, it will go to one place and show one set of data, otherwise it'll show another. And the nice part about this is that, please be the right thing. It's not the right thing. Do I have this in here? I might not. That's all right. I don't have this one in here. But the nice thing is that, again, the only things that I'm missing from this code is 2 script tags. That's it. You add 2 script tags and this works. Again, you still don't need Node. You still don't need anything else. You can still load this off of a CDN. So it really does, you can prototype a pretty large scale application just with a few HTML files at most. So we also have an ability to do global data store. This code is a lot longer, and that's not necessarily because Vue is bad for prototyping, because I'm trying to prove the opposite here, but more so because the idea of a global store is really complex on its own. And I think that Vue does it a lot better than Redux or NGRX, which are alternatives on the React or Angular side of things. But let me show you the code so that I stop rambling and can actually showcase a little bit of what something like Vuex might allow us to do. So the idea behind Vuex is that it allows us to have one global store for all of our data. So instead of having something like data function and then a bunch of other things, we have one place to store all of our actions. So this is all of our data. These include functions that we can take in our application, etc. And we have one place for our HTML, and that's it, right? We don't kind of mix waters where we have this component has this set of data, this component has this set of data. And it's very useful if you have a very, 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 very large application that you need to share like the same set of data with multiple different places. So let's go through the code really quickly. I promise it looks significantly more intimidating than it is. we have in our state, by default, we have an array of places. Yes, I apologize. I always forget that step. That's not what I wanted. How do I? Control plus. Right, because I'm not on a Mac, even though I'm on a Mac. That's not confusing. All right. So, again, still not using Node.js. We're still just using the browser and some text. So we add in our script tags for Vue, add our script tags for Vuex. Ta-da, that's all the setup we need. Go. What's up?
So I don't know if this is the case or not, but it seems like React has a little bit more overhead because of like the node modules or whatever. So is this overhead in terms of just things you have to download as opposed to React?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So the question is, it seems like React has more overhead because of node modules. Does this have lower overhead? Yes and no. So yes, because you can build an application this way. But here's the problem. I'm on one HTML file, and even with a really small demo, I'm still at 125 lines of code. Now, for anyone that's used React, especially if you're dealing with Redux, which is the alternative to Vuex in React, this is a child's play number of lines of code. This is tiny compared to what you would need for Redux in React. However, if you're going to build a large-scale application, you really, really, really want to use NPM. You want to use Node. You want to use the same type of packaging overhead. We will get to the point where we will explain when you want to use it, which I just said, larger applications. But we'll showcase how it is easy to set up those projects with Vue. So it's kind of a dual-edged sword. Yes, for rapid prototyping, there's significantly less overhead. And I think overall, in terms of code size, not just like tooling size, it is less code to write very similar style things in Vue over React. But in terms of tooling overhead, I think there's a similar level of setup for both of them, at least for smaller projects that you want to use outside of this. I just ended up using the two script tags to showcase that it's much easier to start and to prototype with, instead of like, install Node, run npm, do this, do that. And it's like, I just wanted to prototype some CSS. Like, I didn't need all that. So kind of a dual-edged sword. I'm sorry that I had to answer your question with like 3 asterisks. And unfortunately, that's how lots of engineering... It's how a lot of engineering questions tend to go. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. So walking through the code, we're just telling Vue that we want to use this global state. We're defining a new store. We have an initial state, which includes Actually, tell you what, I realize I'm starting off on the wrong foot here. Why don't I open up the demo, show what the code does, and then explain the code? That's going to help a lot. I apologize. So if I enter in the name of a place, Fresno, and I place it into La La Land, because why not? And then we do other location, because Fresno is the only place that comes to mind off the top of my head for some reason. I haven't been there in many years. But so we can create items with some metadata associated. We can delete these items from the list. It's a really, really, really simple application of a list of like, I need some data validation. That's it, right? So we have places to visit, which is an empty array by default. So when I first loaded the application, you notice there wasn't anything in there. We have something called getters. So there is the ability to filter all of these based on which of these 3 locations I had. I just didn't add that in for some reason. This is old code. But essentially what this means is that we could run this function, say get places by location, and it would just flat list them out. We wouldn't have to do any additional logic. So that's just a simple filter function. We have actions. So actions are just like methods that you would call. So if you wanted to add an item, remove an item, edit an item. In this case, we've defined add place, which takes the store and a place. All that does is create a new object, push it to the array, and run a commit, just like if you were using Git. If you had added a file, you'd commit it and then push it. Similar with a store, you have a set of changes that you want to make that you then commit to your store to update that store for everything else. You can remove a place, which is find the index, return that, remove that item from the index, commit. And then we have something called mutations, which is going to be removed in future versions. So I'm going to kind of gloss over that. And then the HTML, we enter the name of the place. We bind that input data with the name variable of this component. We have a selection, which is also bound to a variable in this component. We have a create button. And when we click this create button, the submit action on this form will run this function. We also have a v-for, which means for each of these items in the global state, render it out. So we'll have a delete button, we'll have the name button, all that good stuff. And then all we have in this component in terms of data is the temporary name and location. So we could have, when we submit the form, we run the dispatch action. So we run that function that we defined higher above in the state called add places to visit. And when we delete an item, we just remove that item based the idea. That's about it, right? So like it took all of 120 lines to build a simple to-do list. And the nice part there is that this isn't great for a to-do list, but let's say that I'm building a website that you shop on, right? And when I build this website to go shopping, I need to have a shopping list, right? So I want this button in the corner on Amazon or whatever to always be updated based on what you're adding to the list. Well, that's one component on one side of the tree. And then you have your actual list once you open up a page. That's another component on a different side of the tree. And let's say that you wanted to confirm whether the user actually wanted to add more than one item. That's another component. So like these are 4 or 5 places in your application that you don't know if you need that data or not. And in those instances, having one global place where you always know you can look for the data and find it is really, really useful for larger scale applications where you need to duplicate that data. There are ways of doing it without duplicating that data, but it's a lot nicer once you have something like Vuex. This is going to be a bit of a non-point because it's not meant to be something to look at. But if you're familiar with Redux, if you're familiar with NGRX, one of the things that's really annoying about both of those template libraries is that you have to define a lot of boilerplate. So for each of the methods, you have to define that there is a method and the method has a name and the method does this, and before you can even write the method itself, right? So you're looking at like 20 to 30 lines of code per item in your store. And at that point, your 120-line code project becomes like 240 lines for no reason, right? And it's like, but why? Just let me write the code, please. And I will say this much in defense of Redux. They have had some community projects that have become official, like Redux Toolkit, and those have become much, much, much better in recent years. But it's still one of the nice things about the engineering behind a lot of Vue tooling and Vuex itself is that you don't have so many lines of code to do very, very similar, if not the same actions. Another thing that is kind of nice to build an application, you want to have a pretty UI. Because I'm telling you, I sure wouldn't buy this app. It could have all the features in the world, but with an unstyled delete button, I don't know, man. I'm not thinking about it. And this is where the community comes into play. So Vue does not have any official alternatives for how you can get things to display, how you can make things look. But there are really, really big and well-maintained community projects like Vuetify. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. And they provide all sorts of different UI elements that you can throw across your application. So like, for example, let's say that I want to have an alert pop up on screen that's all pretty and well styled and placed in the right place. You know, you can have dialogues, you can have buttons that aren't just an unstyled delete button. And this is loading. Yes. So look at how pretty that button is. Isn't that pretty? And this seems really simple, but as someone who has worked on UI component libraries for larger companies, it's a lot harder than it sounds. It's a lot harder than it sounds to build out all these components with a stable API in ways that you can overwrite. And given how many components they have, and this is only one of many sections on their website, there's a lot to gain from utilizing an existing UI library. Vuetify is just one example. There's all sorts of other examples. React has a similar library called Material UI. The only one of the frameworks that has an official UI library is Angular, and that is maintained by the same team. But again, Vue has really good community options. So you were asking earlier whether scaffolding is easier or harder in Vue. Well, one of the things that Vue does that makes things super simple, super simple, is something called the Vue CLI. So the Vue CLI lets you use Webpack and TypeScript and Babel, and like you can pick like 40 different tools and sit there and granularly customize which tools you want to use and how and where and why. And you run one command and it sets all of it up for you, and then you run one command to run your development mode and one command to build, and that's it. Like this GIF is literally as long as it takes to set up a scalable, maintainable project that uses NPM, that uses all that good stuff. Like, we're done. That's it. It's ran like 3 times since I've been talking. So it's been really impressive how they've been able to run their CLI project. It'll manage a lot of your dependencies for you. So if you're not familiar with Angular, this might be a little foreign, but I personally love the look of Angular code. Like, they use classes instead of functions to define their components, and just something about using classes just looks right to me. Like, I love the syntax. It looks really pretty, and especially if you're doing stuff with databases and ORMs where you're mapping classes to your database objects, it's just nicer to be like, oh cool, I use a class instead of, all right, I have this weird function syntax. Well, Vue has an option for that. So it is not official. It is ran by the community. However, I will say that I've seen multiple conversations with Evan Yu, who's the creator of Vue, that have included this package as consideration for doing something or not doing something. So this community package is not only well maintained by the community, but the official team has basically said, hey, we're going to do everything in our power not to break this as badly as we can, which is very nice of them, I'd like to add. In this case, we import one thing from this package called Vue class component, and then we treat it like a decorator. We wrap at component, we give it our template. We have our getters, which is the computed properties. We have greet, which is our methods, and then we have our properties. And like, it's totally a preference thing, but something about having to define data as a function that returns an object and props as an object that has this and this and this, like, it's not my favorite, and I think that this just provides an alternative option syntax that I personally really, really like. So what do we have for the future of these projects? React is gonna change the game in a few months here when they finally drop Suspense. Suspense is a feature that will handle like 90% of UI loading. It will do all sorts of really fancy things where it will render your UI while you're still waiting for your data of that UI to load, which sounds really mind-bending and crazy, because it is, and it's very cool. Vue 3 is going to be a complete rewrite written in TypeScript instead of JavaScript, which will enable certain features, not just from the development of Vue 3, but for other developers might be able to help you use the library in a bit easier manner. They have a hooks alternative, so if you've used React hooks, or maybe you've heard about it as like this really cool fancy way of loading data and handling data, Vue 3 is going to have something very similar. Angular, what are they doing? That's a great question. The answer is that they've been doing a lot with their like underlying toolkit in terms of Ivy. They've been doing some things with their build toolkit called Bezel. I have no idea, like I've used both of those and I don't know what they do. It's kind of hard to tell where Angular is going in the future, but they are still actively developing it and maintaining it. That's not all. That's a facade slide from earlier. We're actually going to walk through and develop an application with Vue for Unity, building on top of the game that we have. Do we have Unity on this that's loaded? So if I type Unity, it's not going to slap me. I asked that because most things I type in the computer end up slapping me. It's like, you wanted a reducer? No. Actually, do we have a build of WebGL done?
Not an updated one.
Okay, that's fine. So in order to integrate Unity or Vue with Unity, we have to have a WebGL build because we have to run it on the web at some point. I'm only starting with that first just because I know how long it takes. We're actually going to take a step back once we start that build and start working on the scaffolding of the project, how to get a Vue website set up with the Vue CLI, so not just using scripts. This looks really pretty. I don't think I saw that last time. That's very pretty. So builds. Oh no, that's not what I meant to click. Undo. Hello? No. Stop. Don't do that. Pardon me. Yeah, wait a minute. Hang on. I feel ripped off. There we go. The chocolate is melted on the laptop. Okay, yeah, the cancel. Crazy. All right, I'm not going to select development build because we're going to be doing other things anyways. So build, WebGL, select folder. Do we need both main and game? Okay. All right. So while that's running, we're going to install npm. We're going to do some initial setup. So let's start with that. What am I doing? I thought control. I'm confused. I haven't used Windows in far too long. All right. So download node. We're going to use version 12 and really hope that that runs. I only say that because version 12 broke some things, and when I last used it, it had just released, and it didn't want to run anything. It wasn't a buggy release. No. All right. So I'm going to download it off Node.js. Hit all of the next buttons as fast as you can. I will say for most installers, usually you want to be like, hey, be careful and read what you're doing, but Node is really good about not putting a bunch of garbage in their installer. So we can just add to path, npm package, automatically install. That might break some things. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to break everything on this computer. Yeah, but it will like change all your paths and like update Python and update C. It'll do bad things. I never trust that, and I always just run it manually. But that's because I have things like Unity installed. So yeah. That's I'm eating my words. That is correct. Okay.
Pull that up.
I honestly have no clue how to deploy to Athena.
Yeah, you can hit the plus sign right there, create a new tab.
Oh, okay.
And then so you can see athena.ecs.csus.
Athena dot what?
ecs.csus.edu /
Oh, I'm sorry.
/ and then tilde and then checo PHCHECO.
PHE what?
Okay. Enter. So this is something I've been trying to work on.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So you have like the header, your main body, and then you have the footer.
Gotcha.
And then the right side, you can click on Discord, and it'll launch Discord. Like
nice.
Having,
yeah, nice. Very nice. And we'll take a look at that once I'm done.
Yeah, no, but the main point is like this is kind of like how I wanted to like have everybody just like following.
Oh yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
So we can have something because right there I have SoDA. And under projects, I would like it to be a way where you click on that, it takes you to the landing page.
Yep.
But we have all of our WebGLs, like you can have just like maybe just an image.
I got
of
you.
a real project, and we click on it, and
Yep.
it'll launch
Yeah.
the GL. So that's kind of an idea. that
Yeah.
We're gonna be since every game that we're going to be building here, I want it to be also buildable with GL. So like, you know, students can have like, to put them on Athena, share it, and everybody has a mobile device to, you know, be able to share.
Right.
You know, and this is the easiest way to deploy and share. Just use a web link.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll have UI libraries going for us. We'll have all sorts of good stuff. So once Node is finished, we'll launch command prompt. We'll make sure that Node is present. It is, yay. All right, I'm gonna do CD downloads. So can everyone see this, or do I need to scroll in, zoom in? I'm good, okay. Okay, so I'm going to Google the Vue CLI just because I don't remember exactly what the command is. Get started. Okay, so it's the @Vue/CLI. Yep. Well, yeah, I was just about to say. If you type in -G, it will install it globally. You could also do like npx Vue CLI, but I like globally installing things. Makes me happy. So we're going to do that. Pretty straightforward reasoning. That's tasty. That's very good. People are going to get that in recording and not understand what I'm talking about. But I'm eating a candy I was given. It was very tasty. Isn't it though, really? The animation. Yeah, they should really have a prefers reduced motion. That was a very nerdy accessibility joke. That's what that was. I'm like impressed, yeah. So how's everyone doing? We doing good? Actually, are there any questions at this point so far? Anything? No? Okay, I tried.
So like for, so when you're building out your you know, your actual UI using like divs and whatever, how easy is it to hook into something like using like Bootstrap to get your UIs to look all nice, or like Tailwind, you know, those kinds of stuff, and then minifying the first CSS to make the files small?
Right. So the question was, how easy is it to integrate Bootstrap or Tailwind, something along those lines? Answer: super simple. It's as easy as integrating it in React. So on your, actually, we can. I'll touch that in a second. We have the ability to like import global files. So on the initialization file, we can import the CSS, and it will import it throughout the entire application. And when you import it, then you can just use classes as if you would any other HTML application. And that's something for Bootstrap. For Tailwind UI, I haven't used that. And I know there is post CSS that will let you do a bunch of cleanup and minimization. And one of the things that I really like about Vue CLI is that it lets you customize the Webpack config. So React won't let you do this. Angular won't let you do this. So if you need to add some build step, you're completely out of luck and you have to eject from their tool. Vue lets you actually override everything. All of their Webpack configs, all of their Babel configs, so you can be super, super custom with how you set up your build tools to remove a lot of additional stuff if you don't need it. I will say that it is much more advanced usage, so I probably won't touch on that here. Instead, we'll use a UI framework that's specifically built for Vue, but there is nothing stopping you from using something like Bootstrap or Tailwind UI. So once we've installed Vue CLI, we have the Vue command. I don't know what it's doing. There we go. So we can create a new project just by typing in Vue create. What's an app name? Someone call something. Quack-a-mole? Quack-a-mole. I heard quack. We're sticking with it. And we're going to add a duck logo on the main page. It's going to be great. Look, who doesn't like ducks? Geese are another story. Yeah, if you said geese, well, we might have had a problem there, but I don't know. I think a duck on the screen is perfectly fine. I solemnly swear the CLI is usually faster.
That's my computer.
That's because it's a Mac. I say with one right next to me. Oh, well, okay, so lucky me, I pushed enter by accident, but usually, because I was spamming enter when nothing was happening, usually what will happen is it will ask you what tools you want to use. So it provides default options, so you can just say, just use whatever you guys want, I don't care, which is what I did select, and that's fine, because it's what I was going to select either way. But there's a way to say, I want to use SAS, and I want to use handlebars, and I want to, well, handlebars doesn't make much sense, but you can really, really customize which tools you're using with their CLI. You don't have to just stick with whatever they have set up out of the box. While we do that, I'm going to look up the documentation for Vuetify and the documentation for, not React, Vue Router. All right. The what?
That's usually probably.
It's true.
Almost there. I'm recording the screen. I'm streaming it.
What? You're saying your computer shouldn't be able to do like 80 terribly powerful things all at once? Lame if true. In my defense, the Unity one was going to take the longest.
What's that?
Yes.
No. It persists, right?
Oh, you know what I'm also going to do? I'm also going to pull up the docs for... Yeah. By golly, if it's not melted, I'm not doing it right. Hey, we did it. All right. So what we're going to do in order to integrate Unity into our Vue application is we're going to use this library called Vue Unity WebGL, which makes loading Unity in as HTML like one line. It's fantastic. It's wonderful. Love it. Yes, it is nice. Hey, that looked like progress. I like seeing that. Hey, invoking generators. What does that mean? I know what that means. Oh, installing additional dependencies? No! Betray. Yeah, betray. Hey, I said there was minimal configuration from me. All right, cd quack-a-mole. npm run serve. I'm going to actually do that just so I can show what the default page looks like. We can take a look at the default code. We can all be happy. It can load anytime now. And you know what? I'm going to allow public access. Gasp. Shame on you. Localhost 8080. 8080. I know. Crazy, isn't it? I know, isn't it like very, very nice? We're gonna open folder. We'll do downloads, quack-a-mole. We'll take a look at the code real quick. Or real quack.
Oh, yeah.
So by default, we yield, cease. Okay. By default, you know how previously we had our new view and that would like mount it and all that other stuff. So we still have that line in our main.js. We have our default index HTML file. It really doesn't do anything except provide a div that says ID equals app. That ID is then used by main.js to inject and mount Vue. And then we import Vue from app.vue. All right, we'll install that. So instead of a .js file or a .ts file if you're using TypeScript, Vue uses a .vue file, which is a bit weird but very cool because it means that we can have all of our HTML, we can have our JavaScript, and we can have our CSS all in one file. What? It's amazing. Superb. All right, see, now we have, once you install the config, we now have all this pretty syntax highlighting. You can see that we are importing hello world from another place. I swear I know how to code. So here's where all those links are. Here's that message, which is a prop, right? So we have, just as we showed before, we have a prop called message, which we then render as hello world and we pass in that message. We have some CSS that's applied, all sorts of good stuff. We're going to remove most of this.
When you say message code, let's say like in React, when you pass in the props.
So like, are you asking what if we wanted to do like data?
Yeah, and you can tag it, you can pass any data and attributes.
Yeah, so what we could do is we could do, hang on, I haven't used. So we could use our binding, and then instead of a string, we could use what is happening. We could use the data message, and then now if I reload, you can see that it says hello world. So it's that same semicolon that we use to bind like our src, but in this case we're using it to bind our property inputs. Sorry, I paused there. I totally forgot how to do Vue for a whole minute there. So I'm actually going to stop this because I want to install the package for the Vue Unity. So let's do npm install Vue Unity WebGL. Vue Unity WebGL. And part of that is that we're going to take this build folder from our WebGL build, and we are going to copy it into our public folder. That's it. So we're going to wait for our dependency to build. We'll add like one or two. I actually still needed that open. Why did I close that? Because I need to grab the name of this JSON file, that JSON file. webgl.json. I would laugh if someone wasn't paying attention to the stream and then all of a sudden hear me say JSON like 5 times and they're like, wait, what? That was their name, Jason. Huh? Sorry. I'm very ADHD. All right, so now I'm going to actually edit our, I'm going to make a new component. Sorry, no words. I'm going to call it Unity, what did I call it? Unity display. So I'm going to remove all of that from the template because that's too many links. And you know what? While we're at it, I'm going to change hello world.view to remove all of those links too, because that's too many links. Too many. All right. And here, I'm going to have an opening div, closing div. We're going to remove props. We're going to call this Unity display. We're going to remove all of this CSS because we don't need it. And we're going to import Unity. What did I do? Control, paste, cool. And then we're going to do components. So when you use components like this, what you're saying is I want to use this Unity as its own component that I can then reference within the template. And then I'm going to copy. So you import the value, but then you provide the component. Because otherwise what would happen is if I didn't have that in here, there's no default tag called Unity, right? Like, so Unity has to know, or Vue has to know what tag Unity maps to, right? And the only way it knows how to do that is based on this map that we provide. So we import the component value from the import statement, and then we provide it using the same name. Not really, lowercase is all the time. So and let's say that I had hello world, right? Or Unity world. Instead it would be hello dash world. Vue automatically adds camel cases, does all that fancy goodness. I'm going to remove static because that's not what it's called. We're going to rename this to WebGL if I can type, right? Because that's what it's called. Build WebGL.json. Yes. And then we're going to have build Unity loader.js. We're going to hit save. But you'll notice that I did not add that to the app. So we need to do, oh, I was wrong. Yeah, I was just straight up wrong. That's not correct. So I guess it doesn't camel case. I know there are instances where it does. I just don't know where. Oh. What are you doing? I apologize. All of my keyboard shortcuts are messed up right now. And then, oh golly. Good golly, Miss Molly. See, I said it did that. Psh, I'm so correct. I'm the maximum correct. All right, then I'm going to do npm run serve. I'm going to start our development server. All right, we're going to reload the page. And, hey, that's looking like a thing. That's pretty cool. Here we go. But yeah, now we can play. We can do, there we go. See? All sorts of cool stuff. It's the controller, darn it! Look good. I wasn't complimenting my own code, by the way. I was saying this game is looking good. I swear. Not that one. So that's cool, right? But we don't want it. We want like /game, right? Because we want to be able to like go to a different URL, different games on there. That's not what we want. So let's do that. Let's add a router. Usually at this point, I would do like a git commit. I'm going to do that. The reason why I can do git add right away is because there's a git ignore. So it won't commit any of the going to do is I'm going to actually start call this router.js. In our main, you're going to import So what we're going to do is we're going to move all of our router code over to router.js. So that includes things like I'm also going to create something, a folder called Views. So the reason behind this is like very subjective, so feel free to switch your code another way if you want. But the idea is anytime that you have a URL, you have a view. Any components that you use to display UI within that view are inside of components. So it's understanding very quickly, once your app starts scaling more and more, you have this ability to go, wait, how do I get to this thing? Oh, right, it's a component. It doesn't have a URL. So I'm going to create a new element inside of that. We'll call that app shell. Yeah, I just copied and pasted that. So I'll explain why we did that, because we're actually going to move everything that's an app right now into action. And then that way, if you have multiple views, you can render the data completely different. Actually, what we'll do is we'll set up two routes. We'll have /game, which will include Unity, and there will be home, which will be our Keller element. So what we're going to do is we're going to do path blank and component hello can even contain variables within them that you can then use to grab data from the server. So let's say that I typed in game/hello 123. I could use that variable, hello 123, to go look up on a server, so like a post request, get me the game that is present at hello 123, and your server could return. So you could use like dynamic data from your URL to provide data to your application, which is not only super cool, but also have a bunch of really, really big applications, right? Like the ability to link directly to the game is so you can really go in deep and then have children of children of children of children of children of children. Oh, it does not like the image. Right? Where is it? It doesn't like the image. Well, that. No. That doesn't like it. It doesn't like it. Remove it. Come on. Well, it should just dot shoot. That's okay. We'll fix it. Because I was able to fix it before. We'll just have should work with this. Oh, I'm a silly goose. Yeah, that's why this is not. Drum roll, please. Yeah, the image was fine. Hey, that doesn't show the game. That's what we wanted, actually. Now, if I go to /game, ta-da! That's cool. That's not pretty, though. Okay, you're actually right. I'm gonna fix that first. But then we're gonna add some other fancy stuff. So WebGL content, and then one child down. We'll do ID container. We'll do ID container CSS. So let's go to Unity as well. For various reasons, I actually have to remove this from the scope because that's the best way to do it. So if I do 0 auto, it should, I said right. It also needs important because, as I mentioned before, Unity is weird. Hey, it's in the center of the screen. We like that. Alright, so now that we've gotten that down, let's go ahead and add some wild. Let's do get add grid. Added routes. Let's go look for beautiful. Like the command good. New add beautiful. I bet you guys can't hear it, but I can. Add it. That's a neato. Yeah, we can do that, right? That's pretty enough. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it is reactive. That's cool. Let's use this. Because stealing code is the crux of every good developer. I'm gonna get fired. why I like Vue, but admittedly it does make live coding slightly more annoying. I don't even know all the part components mean. I'd have to Google it. So while we're at it, we will I'm just gonna like miss more and more until eventually there's nothing. I'm gonna quickly see what changed. So, oh, it did, okay. So, import beautify from beautify. That's real straightforward. So, we're importing the CSS. Remember how you asked how you use Bootstrap CSS? Exactly. In your name.js, you import the CSS just like you're doing here. They're doing a few extra steps because they want you to know that you're using beautify. So, we're going to beautify. Hey, that's looking pretty neat, right? That's not bad. I don't know why that's not working. But that's not bad. All right, so we're gonna start fixing some things now. Yeah, we're gonna start fixing some things. So let's first format this. No. Let's format. There we go. So we're gonna first format that so it's not quite as confusing. And then what are we going to do? First, we're going to figure out why drawer isn't working. It's because it is a variable that is not assigned. So let's do data function return false. So now if I reload the page, hey, that's pretty cool. All right. And then what else? We want these icons to actually bring us somewhere, right? Like they're not doing anything right now. So let's. I know, aren't libraries cool? This is why libraries are cool. You had me at Ripple. Let's do, what is the name of this? List item group? List item content action? We're going to look up lists. And we're going to see if they have links. Links. Link, vlist item. Applies the vlink list item, applies the 2. That's what we want. So we'll call this one home, and we will do 2 equals home. And we will do 2 equals game. We'll change that, and that should reload everything.
Oh my god.
Look at that! There we go. So now we have routes. We have decent. There we go. Cool. So like within 35 minutes or so, after like the talk, we'll set up something pretty straightforward. The icons aren't working, What is happening? Oh. I'm gonna close Come on, man. This isn't cool. Firefox, come on, man. Vuetify font not, or icon font not loading. Boop. Simple use V icon. All right, well. In Vue CLI, we have no. Here, we'll try that. We will try this as one last ditch effort. And if that doesn't work, well, that'll be unfortunate. Come on. Boop, 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 boop. Oh, I closed the whole project, didn't I? I sure did. Work. There we go. Okay, so now in main.js, we're going to also open up plugins, Vuetify, and we're going to do paste. Okay, npm run serve. You're what?
My computer's melting.
Probably is. It's an Apple. Oh, that was good. That was good. Localhost 8080. Does it do? Nope. Okay, I don't know what's wrong. But we have an app. Yeah. Any other questions? Any feature requests other than fixing the icons?
That looks good.
Yeah, I mean,
You can just rename those side tabs, right?
huh?
You can just rename those side tabs. So if you like had multiple games or something, all this one whack-a-mole.
Right. So what you could do is, I mean, you could also have like a games tab, right? So like, let's say that you had games and then it was just a straight list of all the games. You could even have submenus. So like, if we look at, yeah, we can do that. Let me do, I'm gonna still cheat and go to pre-made layouts. Because again, there's nothing better than that. Oh, close complex, maybe? Open temporary, oh no. No. All right. Nested lists. See, look at that. Isn't that cool? That's neato. All right, so let's look at how we do that. We do admin. Actually, I'm going to see if they have a CodePen link, because then we can just edit this live. They do have a CodePen link. Ha ha ha. So what we can do is we can do vgroup admin. What are under actions? Can minimize that. vlist group. Yeah, okay. So now I'm going to simply remove the v4. And we're going to have the vtext be whack-a-mole, not quack-a-mole. The v icon can be add. Why isn't this working? There we go. Cool. So we can now call that games. vlist group. I just want to hide things. Let me hide them. All right, so now we can do something like that. We can look under our app shell And instead of just having /game, we have our list group, v/activator, and that can be to game. Now we can remove this item. You can format. And usually, I want to make clear, usually what you would end up doing is you would break out all of this into one component and then just pass in this router view as a child of that component, which would make things a little bit cleaner. Okay, so let's see if that works. Localhost 8080. And now we can have games and we can route to the games. So yeah. Right. You have to add some custom logic. I mean, even though we can do Look, I'm an evil person. What's a good screen size to consider mobile 'cause I don't use it. It's not because it's not good, it's just I don't use it professionally. And the fact that I'm able to just kind of remember all this like, here's a great example. Let me Google Vue, let me Google React, and let me Google Angular, and let's look at the first pages of docs. I'm going to start with React because it's my favorite to make fun of. Google, please stop. So, React is super powerful. There's no denying that. But let's look at main concepts. Hello world. The first thing that they start off with is all of that, and I feel very confused already. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I don't get it. Like, there's no way to run that code. There's no way to see it running. Now I could click try on CodePen, but if I'm not familiar with what CodePen is, that might not be clear. But when you start with a how to read this, like, that's useful, right? Like, there is some application, and I really don't want to knock the docs maintainers for React because they do work really hard, and they're very, very, very good at what they do. But I feel that a lot of the knowledge assumptions, which is kind of covered here, is that React is much more geared towards people who are already familiar with JavaScript, already familiar with a lot of the concepts at play. And while that's fantastic, and I was able to learn React really fast because I had already used Angular and I already knew a lot of the concepts, it's not great for a newcomer, right? Like, if I don't know JavaScript, if I see a reduce in the or in the React docs, I'm going to get confused, right? Meanwhile, Angular, right? I think they have some of the best introductory documentation. But so fundamentals, like, they have all sorts of getting started documentation. But here's the problem. I can tell you from experience, 2-3 months into your first project, you've read all the docs. What then? All the advanced documentation, like, I'll give you a perfect example of what, no, it's container, what is it? Vue container ref. This is what some of their advanced documentation looks like. Yeah. Do you understand it yet? Because I don't. I wrote 55 pages to understand this. Like, whoa. That's cool. All right, I'll check that out. Sorry, guys. But like, this is a really great example of, like, using Angular's docs. They're really, really good until they stop existing. Meanwhile, Angular, they have videos. Like, one of their first things is a video. They have, like, all of this, and then all of their pages about router and Vuex and everything else has just as much, if not more, documentation. Like, they have an amazing team doing the documentation on Vue. There's probably more people working on the docs on Vue than there is working on the code at Vue. And that's amazing. I love that. That is so good, and we need more of that. So, like, whenever I recommend people to start with a framework, 9 times out of 10 it's Vue, and it's not because it's so superior. It's not because, oh, you just get it. It's because their documentation is so much more thorough, and as much as it sounds bad, it does hold your hand a lot more in ways that are so, so nice when you're getting started. So, yeah. That's the thing that everyone looks over. It's like, which one has good docs? Well, my opinion. So,
That's a good comparison.
yeah. Anyways, I'm going to stop recording.